The morning sun poured its light over the city courthouse, where crowds had already gathered. News vans lined the street, reporters holding microphones, their voices rising in anticipation of a sensational trial. Inside the grand stone building, people whispered and gossiped. Everyone wanted to witness the downfall of Olivia Huntley, one of the city's most powerful billionaires. She was accused of a crime so serious it could destroy everything she had built. But amidst the polished shoes and expensive suits, a strange figure moved slowly toward the courtroom doors. Daniel, a ragged homeless man with weary eyes. Daniel's appearance was met with disgust by many standing in the halls. His clothes were torn and stained, his long hair tangled, his beard unkempt. He smelled of the street, a scent people quickly moved away from. Yet today, he wasn't here to beg for spare change or shelter from the cold. He had been called as a witness, something no one in their right mind could have expected. Some lawyers smirked at the sight of him, already dismissing whatever words might leave his mouth. To them, he was invisible. To Olivia, he might just be her only chance. The courtroom was filled with polished wood, tall windows, and an air of solemn authority. As the judge entered, everyone stood. Olivia sat at the defendant's table, her face calm but her eyes betraying fear. She wore a dark tailored suit, yet her hands trembled slightly as they gripped the armrest. She knew that even her fortune might not be enough to win this case. The prosecutors were ruthless, the evidence twisted, the media already convinced of her guilt. But deep down, Olivia knew someone out there had seen the truth, and now that someone was about to walk forward. "Call your witness," the judge ordered. The defense attorney rose, adjusted his tie nervously, and said, "Your Honor, we call Daniel Reeves to the stand." A hush fell over the room as Daniel rose from the back row. His footsteps echoed awkwardly against the wooden floor. Murmurs erupted immediately. "A homeless man. This is a joke," one man muttered. A woman covered her mouth in disbelief. Even the bailiff seemed confused, but he guided Daniel to the witness stand. Olivia's heart pounded. She remembered his face from somewhere, but she never imagined he would be the one to speak today. Daniel raised his hand for the oath. His fingers shook, but his voice was steady. "I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth." The judge studied him carefully, clearly uncertain of this witness's credibility. The prosecutor leaned back in his chair, smirking, already planning to tear the man apart during cross-examination. To most people in the room, Daniel looked like nothing more than a broken drifter. But when he finally sat down, his eyes burned with intensity. Olivia noticed it instantly. Those eyes held something she desperately needed right now: honesty. The prosecutor wasted no time in attacking. "Your Honor," he said loudly, "we are expected to believe the words of a man with no home, no job, and no reputation? How can society trust him to tell the truth?" Laughter and murmurs of agreement spread across the gallery. Daniel sat silently, letting the insults wash over him. He had lived through worse. Every day on the street, he heard the same ridicule. Today, however, he wasn't going to let it break him. He leaned forward slightly, waiting for the chance to speak. Inside, he reminded himself, "Olivia needs me." Finally, the defense attorney asked, "Mr. Reeves, can you tell the court where you were on the night of the incident?" Daniel cleared his throat. His voice cracked at first, but grew stronger with each word. "I was outside the Huntley corporate offices. I usually sleep near the loading docks. It's quiet there, and no one bothers me." The court shifted uncomfortably. People didn't like to be reminded that even in the wealthiest parts of town, there were men like him, invisible yet present. And that night, Daniel continued, I saw something that proves Olivia Huntley is innocent. The words hung heavy in the air. For the first time, Olivia's attorney leaned forward with hope. The prosecutor stiffened. The judge adjusted his glasses, intrigued. Explain, the judge said firmly. Daniel inhaled slowly, gathering courage. Around midnight, I saw a man in a black suit enter the building. He moved quickly, as if he didn't want to be noticed. It was not Olivia Huntley. I know what she looks like. This man was taller, broader, and he wore gloves. I remember because he dropped something near the stairs, a set of keys. I saw him, and I never forget faces. The prosecutor jumped up immediately. Objection! This is hearsay, the ramblings of someone who spends his nights in the shadows. How can we verify anything this man claims? He gestured dramatically toward Daniel, as though he were a wild animal. The judge raised a hand. Objection noted, but the witness may continue. We will determine the credibility later. Daniel met the prosecutor's glare calmly. For years, people dismissed him, but tonight, he knew what he had seen. The truth was on his side. Even if no one wanted to believe it, his story wasn't over yet. Olivia leaned forward, her breath catching. For the first time in weeks, a spark of hope flickered within her. She had felt utterly alone, trapped in a web, spun by enemies, eager to see her destroyed. Yet here sat Daniel, a man with nothing to lose, defending her with words stronger than any legal defense. Their eyes met briefly, and she felt an odd connection. She had helped the homeless many times, but she didn't expect one of them to help her in return. Gratitude, mixed with disbelief, surged through her chest. Could this man truly save her life? Daniel's voice grew steadier as he recounted the night. I saw him leave about an hour later. He carried a bag, heavy. He placed it in the trunk of a dark sedan and drove off. The jury leaned in closer. This wasn't the story the prosecution had prepared for. Their narrative relied on pinning everything on Olivia. But here was a witness placing someone else at the scene. The defense attorney quickly asked, Mr. Reeves, you're certain this wasn't Miss Huntley? Daniel shook his head firmly. I may not own much, but I own my eyes, and I know truth. The judge raised an eyebrow. You seem very sure of yourself. Daniel met his gaze. When you live on the street, Your Honor, you notice things, small details, movements, faces, because your life depends on it. People think we're invisible, but in reality, we see everything they miss. A heavy silence filled the room. Even the jurors seemed moved by the quiet dignity in his words. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. His smirk had vanished. For the first time in the trial, Olivia's side wasn't losing it. It was fighting back. And the fighter wasn't a lawyer. It was a homeless man. The prosecutor tried again, desperate to regain control. Mr. Reeves, you expect us to believe you when you admit you live outside, without shelter, without steady meals? How reliable can your memory be? Daniel leaned forward. His beard framed his tired but sharp eyes. Living outside doesn't cloud my memory, it sharpens it. When you're cold and hungry, you remember every sound, every face, every detail that might mean survival. I remember the man in the black suit because he didn't belong there. He looked around nervously, like he was afraid of being seen. And I saw him. Some members of the gallery began nodding, whispering among themselves. The story had weight. It wasn't polished or rehearsed, but it carried truth. The defense attorney pressed further. Mr. Reeves, can you describe this man? Daniel nodded. Mid-40s, tall, strong build, dark hair, a scar near his right eyebrow. He wore a black coat and gloves, even though it wasn't cold that night. The courtroom shifted again. People exchanged glances. This wasn't vague rambling. It was precise. It was real. Olivia's attorney scribbled notes rapidly, already sensing a new direction for their case. Hope was no longer a flicker, it was fire. Olivia's pulse raced as she listened. She realized Daniel wasn't just testifying, he was fighting for her, in a way no one else had. She thought back to the times she had quietly funded shelters, donated to food banks, and handed out blankets on winter nights. She had always believed those gestures disappeared into the void, unnoticed. But now, one man from that forgotten world stood up for her. Her eyes watered slightly as she whispered under her breath, "Thank you." Daniel didn't hear it, but he felt the warmth of her gaze, stronger than any courtroom applause. The judge leaned back, clearly affected. This testimony changes things. Bailiff, call for verification of the security footage logs from that night. We need to confirm if the cameras were indeed disabled, as the witness suggests. The prosecutor's face paled. His entire strategy had relied on the video evidence showing nothing useful. If the cameras had been turned off, Daniel's testimony would become even more crucial. The courtroom buzzed with tension. For the first time since the trial began, Olivia's fate wasn't sealed. She had a chance, and it came from the most unexpected person imaginable. Daniel's story wasn't over. He took a deep breath and added, "Before he left, I heard him make a call. I couldn't catch all the words, but I remember him saying, 'She'll take the fall.' He was talking about Olivia." "I know it." Gasps echoed through the room. Olivia's attorney's eyes widened. This was explosive. The prosecutor shot up again, yelling, "Objection!" But the damage had already been done. The jury stared at Olivia, then at Daniel, their expressions shifting. For weeks, the trial painted Olivia as guilty. But now, a different picture was emerging, one that showed betrayal. The judge raised a hand. "Objection noted. We will seek corroboration, but the statement will remain in record." The prosecutor slumped back, his confidence shaken. Daniel sat silently, his heart racing, but his face calm. He knew the risks of speaking here. He knew people would doubt him, mock him, call him a liar. But for once in his life, he didn't care. This wasn't about him. It was about truth. And truth didn't need a suit or a title, it just needed a voice. He was that voice. The courtroom wasn't laughing anymore. It was listening. Olivia's breathing slowed as relief washed over her. She could see the tide turning, slowly but surely. For the first time since her arrest, the jury wasn't looking at her with condemnation. They were looking at her with curiosity. Who was the man in the black suit? Who wanted to frame her? Daniel had cracked the wall built against her. She gripped her attorney's arm and whispered, "We need to protect him. They'll come after him next." The attorney nodded grimly. He knew she was right. Daniel had just put himself in danger by revealing too much truth. As the judge adjourned for recess, Daniel rose from the stand. The gallery was silent, eyes following him as he walked back to the benches. For the first time in years, he wasn't invisible. He wasn't just the homeless man. He was Daniel Reeves, the witness who might save a billionaire. Olivia caught his gaze as he passed. She gave him the faintest nod of gratitude. He returned it with a small, weary smile. He didn't need applause. He only needed to know that his truth had mattered. And deep down, both of them knew this was only the beginning. The courtroom buzzed like a hive after the recess was called. Reporters whispered urgently into their microphones. their producers shouting orders through earpieces. Homeless man saves billionaire. Unbelievable, one journalist said. Outside, news headlines were already being drafted, painting Daniel as an unlikely hero. But inside, Olivia sat frozen. Gratitude filled her chest, but so did dread. Daniel had spoken words that shifted the trial, but words had consequences. The man in the black suit Daniel described wasn't just a stranger. Olivia recognized the description, and if she was right, the implications could tear apart not only her company, but her life. Daniel sat quietly in the hallway, sipping from a paper cup of water a kind bailiff had given him. His hands trembled as he held it. He hadn't stood in a room full of people listening to him in years. Usually, his voice was drowned out by traffic, ignored by passers-by. Today, it echoed in a place where decisions of life and freedom were made. Yet, his stomach churned. He had spoken the truth. But what if it wasn't enough? What if they twisted his words? And worse, what if the man he described heard about his testimony? Olivia's lawyer approached Daniel cautiously. "You did good in there," he said softly. Daniel nodded but kept his eyes low. Compliments didn't sit well with him. He wasn't used to them. "But listen," the lawyer continued, lowering his voice. "The man you described, Olivia knows him. He's not just anyone. He's connected. That means your life is in danger now." Daniel gave a dry laugh. "Danger? I live in it every day." Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that tonight, sleeping under a bridge, he wouldn't just be hiding from the cold, but from men who wanted him silenced. Back inside, the judge reconvened. The bailiff entered with a file of evidence logs. "Your Honor," he said, "we checked the security system records. Cameras at Huntley Tower were indeed disabled at 11:47 p.m. on the night in question." A ripple of shock moved across the courtroom. Olivia inhaled sharply. That was exactly the time Daniel mentioned seeing the intruder. The jury exchanged looks, their faces showing cracks of doubt about the prosecution's story. The judge tapped his gavel. "This corroborates the witness's testimony. The prosecution must explain this discrepancy." Suddenly, Olivia wasn't the only one under scrutiny anymore. The prosecutor's face burned red as he scrambled for words. "This proves nothing. The cameras could have malfunctioned by coincidence." But the jury wasn't buying it. They leaned back in their seats, skeptical. Daniel, still sitting quietly, lowered his gaze. He didn't want the spotlight, but it was on him anyway. Olivia, watching him from across the courtroom, felt a rush of respect. He wasn't polished, he wasn't rehearsed, but he was authentic, and authenticity was something even the richest lawyer couldn't fake. In this moment, Daniel had given her something money couldn't buy: credibility. During cross-examination, the prosecutor tried to corner Daniel. "Mr. Reeves, isn't it true that your memory could be clouded by hunger or exhaustion? Isn't it possible you imagined seeing someone that night?" Daniel met his eyes steadily. "I know what hunger feels like. I know exhaustion. But I also know what I saw, and I've spent too many nights surviving on details to confuse a shadow with a man." His words carried weight. The jury listened, captivated. They weren't hearing a polished statement. They were hearing raw truth from someone who had no reason to lie. Then Olivia spoke quietly to her lawyer. "I know who Daniel saw." Her lawyer's head snapped toward her. "What do you mean?" Olivia swallowed hard. "The scar near his eyebrow, it matches Richard Cole, my former business partner. He hated me for pushing him out. He swore he'd destroy me." The lawyer's jaw tightened. Richard Cole was powerful, with deep connections in politics and law enforcement. If he was behind this, then Olivia wasn't just fighting for her company, she was fighting for her life. And Daniel, by speaking out, had unknowingly stepped into the middle of a war. After court adjourned for the day, Olivia's driver insisted on escorting her out a side entrance to avoid reporters. But Olivia paused, turning back. Daniel stood alone near the benches, his posture slumped. She walked toward him, ignoring the cameras flashing nearby. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Daniel blinked at her, surprised. "Don't thank me yet. It's not over." She placed a business card in his hand. "If you need help, call this number. No matter what." For a moment, their worlds touched, the billionaire and the beggar. Both knew this bond would not go unnoticed. That night, Daniel returned to his usual spot beneath the overpass. But something felt different. The city noises seemed louder, harsher, as if warning him. He pulled his thin blanket tighter around his shoulders and closed his eyes. Suddenly, headlights swept across the concrete. A black SUV slowed to a stop nearby. Daniel's instincts screamed danger. Two men in suits stepped out, scanning the area. He recognized the look. They weren't lost. They were hunting. His heart pounded as he crawled deeper into the shadows, praying they wouldn't find him. The trial had made him visible, and visibility was dangerous. Meanwhile, Olivia sat in her penthouse, staring out at the glittering city skyline. The champagne glass in her hand trembled slightly. For years, she had stood untouchable. Now, her empire balanced on the words of a man society dismissed as worthless. She thought about Daniel's face, tired, lined with hardship, but honest. She whispered to herself, "How many others like him have I overlooked?" She had always believed her money built walls of protection, but those walls were crumbling, and now a man with nothing had become her shield. The irony was not lost on her. The next morning, headlines filled the newspapers. Homeless man shakes trial of the century, from streets to star witness. Some painted Daniel as a hero. Others mocked him, questioning his sanity. But what none could deny was that his testimony had changed the course of the trial. Olivia's enemies scrambled. Richard Cole read the papers with fury. "That rat ruined everything," he growled, slamming his fist onto his desk. His henchmen stood silently, waiting for orders. "Find him. Make sure he never speaks again." The war, Olivia feared, had officially begun, and Daniel was now the prime target. Back at court, Daniel walked through the marble halls, clutching Olivia's business card in his pocket like a talisman. Whispers followed him everywhere. Some people sneered, others nodded respectfully. He didn't care. He wasn't here to win popularity. He was here because he refused to let a lie destroy an innocent woman. Still, his nerves frayed with each passing moment. He wasn't used to being looked at, to being heard. It made him uneasy. But when he stepped into the courtroom again and saw Olivia's faint smile of encouragement, he felt steadier. For once, he belonged somewhere. The second day of testimony was even more explosive. Olivia's lawyer produced a set of fingerprints found on the keys Daniel mentioned. The forensics confirmed. They matched Richard Cole. Gasps filled the room. The prosecutor stammered, desperate to discredit the evidence, but it was undeniable. Olivia turned toward Daniel, her eyes wide with gratitude. For years, Richard had manipulated the system, hiding behind wealth and influence. Now, thanks to a man society ignored, his mask was slipping. The courtroom was no longer a stage for Olivia's downfall. It was becoming Richard's reckoning. But Daniel knew it wouldn't be so simple. As he left the stand, he caught sight of a man in the gallery dark coat, sharp eyes, staring directly at him. The man gave a faint smirk before leaving the room. Daniel's stomach dropped. He knew that look. He had seen it before, in alleys when someone was about to strike. He whispered to himself, "They're coming for me." For the first time, fear gnawed at him. He wasn't afraid of being mocked or hungry. He was afraid of disappearing quietly, his body dumped where no one would care. Olivia noticed his unease. After court, she approached him again. "You're not safe," she said bluntly. Daniel shrugged. "I've never been safe." But Olivia shook her head firmly. "Not like this. You're on Richard's list now. That's different." She turned to her driver. "Arrange protection. Tonight." Daniel frowned. "Why would you do that for me?" Olivia's voice softened. "Because you risk everything for me, and because maybe I owe you more than you realize." He didn't answer, but for the first time in years, he felt something stir in his chest, a fragile sense of worth. That night, Daniel was escorted to a modest hotel room arranged by Olivia. It was the first real bed he had slept in for years. He lay down, staring at the ceiling, unable to relax. The sheets felt too soft, the silence too heavy. Memories flooded him, how he lost his job, how his family turned away, how he ended up on the streets. He wondered why he, of all people, was chosen to witness that night outside Huntley Tower. Fate had pulled him from the shadows into the light, and he wasn't sure if he was ready. Meanwhile, Olivia prepared for the next day in court. Her lawyer warned her, "Cole won't go down without a fight. He'll dig, manipulate, and strike at your weakest point. And right now, your weakest point is Daniel. Protect him." Olivia nodded grimly. She was no stranger to battles, but this was different. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about survival, hers and Daniel's. She whispered a silent promise to herself. "I won't let them hurt him. He stood for me. Now I'll stand for him." For the first time, the billionaire and the beggar shared the same war. The following morning, Daniel entered the courthouse under escort. Paparazzi cameras flashed wildly, shouting his name. He squinted, overwhelmed by the chaos. "Daniel, did Olivia pay you? Are you lying for her?" The questions were sharp, cruel. He kept walking, clutching the card in his pocket. He remembered Olivia's words, "No matter what, call this number." He hadn't called yet, but knowing he could gave him strength. For years, no one cared whether he lived or died. Now, people cared too much, but only because his words held power. That was both his greatest weapon and his greatest risk. Inside the courtroom, the battle intensified. Richard's lawyers attempted to introduce fabricated evidence, but Daniel's testimony had already planted doubt. Jurors whispered, exchanging skeptical glances. Olivia sat straighter, emboldened. She wasn't broken anymore. She was fighting. And every time her eyes met Daniel's, she drew strength from his presence. She saw him not as a homeless man, but as a warrior in his own right. He didn't fight with money or influence, he fought with truth. And truth was beginning to pierce even the thickest armor of lies. As the day ended, tension lingered in the air. Richard glared across the courtroom, his eyes locking onto Daniel like a predator marking prey. Olivia noticed and leaned toward Daniel. "They won't stop until one of us is gone," she whispered. Daniel gave a tired smile. "Then we better make sure it's him." For the first time, Olivia laughed softly, despite the storm ahead. The billionaire and the beggar, unlikely allies, sat side by side as the trial of the century unfolded. And somewhere deep inside, they both knew the final act was coming, and it would change everything. The courthouse steps were buzzing with chaos. Reporters crowded for sound bites. Police officers tried to maintain order, and Daniel stayed close to Olivia as they exited the building. For a moment, everything seemed calm. But then, a sharp crack echoed in the air. Gunfire. Screams erupted. Olivia's guards shoved her down, covering her body. Daniel instinctively pulled her behind the marble pillar, shielding her with his own frame. Bullets ricocheted off stone. Panic spread like wildfire. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. Richard Cole had decided to silence them permanently, even if it meant doing it in broad daylight. Police officers drew weapons and stormed the parking lot. A black SUV peeled away, tires screeching. Witnesses shouted, pointing. "That's them!" Olivia's lawyer grabbed Daniel's arm. "We need to get you both inside, now." But Daniel stood frozen, his chest heaving. He hadn't thought this far. He wanted to speak the truth, not die for it. And yet, as he saw Olivia trembling, her face pale with fear, something inside him hardened. "If I run now, they win," he muttered. For the first time in years, his life had weight, not just for him, but for someone else. Back inside, Olivia's team debated pulling her from the trial altogether. "It's too dangerous," her lawyer argued. "We'll handle the rest legally." But Olivia shook her head fiercely. "If I disappear now, the jury will think I'm guilty. That's what Richard wants. I won't give him that." She looked at Daniel, her eyes steady. "And he won't stop until you're gone too." Daniel exhaled shakily. "Then we finish this together." Their alliance, unthinkable weeks ago, was now forged in fire. She needed his truth. He needed her protection. Neither could survive this battle alone anymore. The third day of testimony began under heavy police presence. Snipers guarded rooftops. Plainclothes officers lined the gallery. Tension suffocated the air. Richard Cole finally appeared, flanked by his expensive attorneys. He looked smug, as if bullets hadn't flown outside just yesterday. When his gaze fell on Daniel, his smirk deepened. Daniel clenched his fists. Every instinct told him to shrink, to avoid eye contact, but not today. Today he lifted his head and stared back, refusing to be small. The man who once begged for spare change now stood eye to eye with a billionaire villain. The prosecutor tried one last time to discredit Daniel. "You claim to have seen Richard Cole that night, but you're a man with no home, no stability. How can we trust someone who can't even take care of himself?" The courtroom murmured, half expecting Daniel to falter, but he didn't. He leaned toward the microphone, voice steady. "Because I've spent years with nothing. And when you have nothing, the only thing left is the truth. I may not own a home, but I know what I saw, and I'd rather die speaking the truth than live under his lies." The jury sat in silence, every eye on Daniel. His words hung in the air, raw and unpolished. Olivia felt tears prick her eyes. It wasn't the speech of a lawyer or businessman, it was the cry of a survivor. And somehow, that was stronger. Even the judge leaned back, his expression thoughtful. Truth didn't need a suit or a title. Truth just needed courage. Daniel had given them both. For a brief moment, Olivia saw something shift in the jury's eyes. They weren't looking at a homeless man anymore. They were looking at the case's turning point. When Richard Cole took the stand, his arrogance filled the room. "These accusations are ridiculous," he sneered. She's trying to destroy me with some street rat story. But then Olivia's lawyer struck. Mr. Cole, can you explain why your fingerprints were found on Huntley Tower's master key? Richard froze. A murmur swept across the gallery. He tried to laugh it off. Planted evidence. By who? The lawyer pressed. By her, Richard spat, pointing at Olivia. But the jury no longer looked convinced. The cracks in his armor were spreading, and everyone could see it. Then came the bombshell. Olivia's lawyer produced phone records, late-night calls between Richard and the security company on the night the cameras failed. Gasps filled the room. The evidence was damning. Richard's composure shattered. He slammed his fists on the table. "This is a setup," he roared. The judge banged his gavel, demanding order. Daniel, watching from the gallery, felt a strange calm wash over him. For so long, truth had been buried beneath money and power. But now, for the first time, truth was clawing its way to the surface, and it was unstoppable. But Richard wasn't finished. As recess was called, chaos erupted. He shoved past guards, storming toward Olivia. "You'll regret this," he hissed. Security restrained him, but not before Daniel moved, stepping in front of Olivia. Their eyes locked predator and protector. For years, Daniel had flinched from conflict, beaten down by life. But today, he stood firm. Olivia placed a trembling hand on his shoulder. "Don't," she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "He doesn't scare me anymore. It was the truth." For the first time, Daniel wasn't the one running. He was the wall that refused to break. The final day arrived. The courtroom was tense. Jurors visibly exhausted, but determined. Olivia delivered a short, heartfelt statement. "I've spent my life believing money was power. But I was wrong. Truth is power. And thanks to Daniel, the truth has finally been heard." Her words, though simple, struck deep. The jury filed out to deliberate, leaving the room buzzing. Hours ticked by like days. Daniel sat with his head bowed, Olivia's hand resting lightly on his arm. In silence, they waited not just for a verdict, but for the judgment of everything they had endured. When the jury returned, the atmosphere grew electric. The foreman rose, his voice steady. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Richard Cole, guilty on all counts." Gasps, then applause, filled the courtroom. Olivia closed her eyes, tears streaming. Daniel exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Richard screamed, lunging, but marshals dragged him away. His empire crumbled in that instant. The billionaire who thought he owned the world had been undone by the testimony of a man who owned nothing but his truth. Justice had spoken, and it was louder than money. After court, Olivia walked beside Daniel down the courthouse steps. Reporters swarmed, flashes blinding, microphones thrust forward. But Olivia raised a hand. "This man," she said, pointing to Daniel, "is the reason I stand free today. He's more than what society calls him. He's my friend, and he saved my life." Cameras clicked furiously. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, unused to praise, but deep inside, a warmth bloomed. For years, he had been invisible. Today, the world saw him not as a beggar, but as a man of worth. That evening, Olivia invited Daniel to her penthouse. He hesitated, the grandeur overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, sweeping views, it was another universe. But Olivia smiled gently. "You don't have to be anyone else here, just yourself." She poured him tea, and for the first time in years, Daniel sat at a table with someone who looked at him without judgment. The silence wasn't awkward. It was healing. Slowly, the walls he had built to protect himself began to crack, and in their place grew something unfamiliar but powerful belonging. But Daniel knew the battle wasn't just external. Late that night, he stared at the city lights, wrestling with questions. "What now?" he whispered. He wasn't suddenly rich. He wasn't suddenly free from scars. The streets had shaped him, and those years wouldn't vanish. But maybe, just maybe, this was a new beginning. He thought of Olivia's hand on his shoulder, of her words in court. Truth is power. For the first time, Daniel believed it. And for the first time, he wondered if his story wasn't over, but only just beginning. The next morning, newspapers exploded with headlines. Billionaire saved by homeless man's testimony. Truth over wealth. David versus Prast. Goliath trial ends in stunning verdict. Talk shows debated Daniel's role, some calling him a hero, others questioning if he was a fluke. But Olivia didn't care. She made a public statement. "Daniel Reeves is under my personal protection. He has a future, and he has my trust." Suddenly, offers came pouring in: interviews, books, even film rights. Daniel, overwhelmed, turned them all down. "I don't want fame," he told Olivia. "I just want peace." Olivia respected his wish, but she wouldn't let him fade back into the shadows. She arranged housing for him, not as charity, but as recognition. "Everyone deserves a foundation," she said. When Daniel walked into his small but warm apartment, tears welled in his eyes. 4 walls, a bed, a kitchen. It wasn't a palace, but it was his. For years, he had slept under concrete. Now, he had a key. And that key wasn't just to a door. It was to dignity. For the first time, Daniel locked the door and whispered, "I'm home." Weeks passed, and Daniel adjusted to his new life slowly. He found work at a community center, helping others on the streets. "You listen different," one man told him. "Because you've been there." Daniel smiled faintly. For years, he thought his brokenness disqualified him, but now he realized it was what made him valuable. Olivia visited often, sometimes bringing her daughter. Together, they laughed, shared meals, and built an unlikely friendship. The distance between billionaire and beggar shrank with each day, replaced by respect forged in fire. But even as life improved, Daniel carried scars. Some nights, he woke from nightmares of being hunted, of gunfire, of alleys cold and merciless. Olivia reminded him gently, "Healing takes time, but you're not alone anymore." That mattered. For years, loneliness had been his only companion. Now, he had someone who saw him. And slowly, the nightmares began to fade, not because the past vanished, but because the present gave him hope. Months later, Olivia invited Daniel to speak at a charity gala. He almost refused, fearing the spotlight. But she encouraged him. "Your story matters. People need to hear it." Nervously, he stepped onto the stage, faces turned toward him, waiting. He gripped the microphone, his voice trembling at first. "I used to think I was invisible, that my life didn't matter. But one night, I saw something I couldn't ignore. And speaking up saved not just her life, but mine too." The audience rose in applause, some wiping tears. For Daniel, it was the loudest silence he had ever broken. When the night ended, Daniel stood beside Olivia, both gazing out at the city skyline. "Funny," he said quietly. "I used to watch these lights from under a bridge, wondering what it felt like to belong up here. Now, I'm standing here with you. Olivia smiled. You've always belonged, Daniel. The world just needed to see it. He nodded, emotion catching in his throat. For the first time in years, he believed her. The beggar who once had nothing now had purpose, dignity, and a friend who had seen his worth. And that changed everything.